It's a new era in the Pacific Northwest. Pete Carroll out, and they hire the former Michigan and Raven defensive coordinator, Mike Macdonald. People seem to love this guy around the league, but it does always concern me in this day and age when you go out and you hire a defense-first coach, especially when Geno Smith, and we talked about Shane Waldron when we talked about the Bears I guess that was last week only. Shane Waldron, by the end, he's one of the better coordinators in the NFL. I mean, Geno Smith went from journeyman, hey, this guy's not any good, to Pro Bowler in year one, and still had a pretty good year last year as well. You now have Ryan Grubb, who was a great college offensive coordinator at UW. Great. Now, there is some question of, hey, is that him or is that Kalen DeBoer, who, of course, now has parlayed the success at Washington into arguably the best job in college football in Alabama. So there is obviously a question mark of, hey, is Ryan, how much, where does the credit have to go? Is it Grubb? Is it DeBoer? So there is a little bit of a question there. But Alex, more so than anything, I just think even though people like to get on Pete Carroll, they like to get on him. I think Pete Carroll got this team to overachieve over the last few years. I really do. I think there's just something about him where it may not show up in traditional X's and O's, traditional, hey, what's going on here with the Seattle team? I just think there's a different X factor that is not really put togetherable by horrible grammar, but regardless, you can't really put it together by numbers with Pete Carroll. There's just some special factor about his ability as a head coach. And when you go from that to a guy who's never been a head coach before, that does scare me with the Seattle team.
I agree with you with Pete Carroll, especially early in his career. And as you mentioned, this is the end of his era. Mm-hmm. First season since 2009 that we won't see him there, which just feels so weird. But I think more recently, it might have been time to move on. I do agree with it. Now, did they make the right move? And as you're saying, we have somebody that's never been a head coach, but I like the defensive minded. I think it could be good for them. I worry about the OC with no NFL experience. It's a very hard leap from college to NFL.
So I will say, and you brought up a point in there, that it probably was time with Pete Carroll, especially after how last year ended, where still alive, well alive for the playoffs. You get a game against Mason Rudolph in your own building at the end of the year, and not only do you lose, you don't really look competitive. And that, I think you're probably right. I think it probably was because 2 years ago, of course, remember, they trade Russ in the offseason. They're projected to be the worst team in the NFL, and they make the playoffs.
Yep.
That was as good of a if it wasn't for Brian Dable, Pete Carroll probably would have won Coach of the Year 2 years ago, with just how bad Seattle was supposed to be, and they ended up not being. Just looking at the defense again, I don't love the talent on this defense. I think it's a little bit overrated. I think Leonard Williams is overrated. They paid him a lot of money this offseason. Jaron Reed is the guy who I like in that front. Boy Amafe, who, of course, they drafted 2 years ago. They need him to have a bigger year. Secondary-wise, I think Tariq Woolen is a little bit overvalued as well. They do have new look at safety because he wasn't listed on departures. But Jamal Adams is now gone. So, again, you're replacing Jordan Brooks, who is a tackle machine as well.
Right.
Bobby Wagner, even though he led the league in tackles last year, again, at some point he's going to have, that was fine to let him walk. So, new look at linebacker, new look in the secondary for the Seattle defense does concern me as well.
I was really excited when they brought Bobby Wagner back there last year, but they have a very big hill to climb from last year. 30th in opponent yards per game, 31st in opponent rushing yards per game, and 22nd in passing yards per game, allowing 233. So they definitely need to make that switch and get their defense going, which really struggled last year. Offensively, they were just average, right? And not very, like you said, not as competitive as we expected last year from the offensive standpoint.
The Seahawks schedule here, by the way, of course, they also changed their backup quarterback as well. Sam Howell comes over for late draft picks from Washington. I know there's some people that say, it might be a quarterback competition. No, it will not be, guys. If this coaching staff has any clue whatsoever, Geno Smith will be starting week one. Now, If he falls off, all right, maybe we see how later in the season. But if you're serious about competing, I don't even think it's a debate. You have to go with Geno from the get-go. No competition. He's our guy. Forget it about Sam Howell. He's a backup. He was a 4th-round pick. We forget that because he was thrust into the starting role in year 2 in Washington. But
Hey, he's very good at just throwing it up, and he's got 2 really good wide receivers
true.
there in Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. So maybe we'll just see what happens.
By the way, Metcalf, real quick, 80-1 to win Offensive Player of the Year. That was the shortest odds of anyone on this on the Seattle team. Him and Kenneth Walker were in the same pocket there at the Westgate. Kenneth Walker. I think that's going to be running back more by committee. I think Charbonnet is going to get more run for them out of that backfield this year behind Kenneth Walker.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah, he would love them at UCLA, Charbonnet.
Yeah.
7.5 on a win total, Alex. Just looking at the schedule, I will say, if you're going to get out to a reasonable start, first 5 weeks could create that. You get a game you're going to be favored in week 1 against Denver. Arguably, you actually played the 2 worst teams in the AFC the first 2 weeks, even though it is a long trip to New England. Get the Giants week 5, which is a winnable game, and even week 3 against Miami. Long trip.
Yeah.
Unfamiliar defense. Maybe could be a struggle. And also, they've won back-to-back years in Detroit in the regular season as well. So they've had the Lions' number in the regular season the last 2 years.
It's tough. I think that 7.5 is the right number and juice to the over. I could see 8 wins, definitely. Just a lot of unknowns with the coaching staff. So I wouldn't jump to bet this. And what do you think about that DK Metcalf? There's too many other weapons, right?
I wish that price was more. That's really the big thing more than anything. Like, this is the problem in that offensive player of the year market. There's just so many guys who you think of before DK Metcalf. And in order for a guy, I think, that far down the board, in order to win, you would need a down year from Tyreek Hill that's filled with injuries. You need McCaffrey to go a little bit backwards, because if he goes forwards, I think he can win back-to-back. Jamar Chase gets Joe Burrow back for a whole season. I haven't even mentioned Travis Kelce in Kansas City.
Jefferson,
who's the favorite. Yeah. So, we just named 6 guys, and there's another 10 another 10 to 12 that are shorter than him. Both San Francisco guys are shorter, and Ayuk and Samuel at the wide receiver position. Forget just McCaffrey. And also then, if they decide to give it to a quarterback, then the whole thing's even more screwed up. Right. So it's so hard down the line to win Offensive Player of the Year, and there's really no one on this defense. We talked about last week where, I guess actually we talked about it 2 weeks ago with the Giants, where it didn't seem like there's any justification for any awards bets, because you're not going to bet Daniel Jones to win the MVP. Malik Neighbors to win the Offensive Rookie was the only thing that really possibly stood out with that. This is kind of the same boat.
Right.
There's really nothing to force, unless you think Seattle is going to be a playoff caliber team. Then you can look to Mike Macdonald, the coach of the year, at 16-1.
Yes.
You and I think are in the same boat. 7.5 is the right number. I think I had them at 7 and 10. So right smack dab on it. You told me they went 8 and 9, maybe even 9 and 8. Sure, I could see it. But I think we're in agreement there. 7.5, perfect number for the Seahawks.
Which, with your numbers, lean to the under a little bit.
Slightly. Again, it just really depends. We're going to learn a lot about them those first 5 weeks.
Yes, we are.
Because if they come out and they're underwater through 5 weeks, forget it.
Yeah.
Forget it. Because you got to, if you're going to make the playoffs in this division with that team, you have to beat Denver week 1. You have to go across the country and beat a Patriot team in week 2. And then you got to beat the Giants. You got to be 3-2 at a minimum to get through those first 5 weeks. If you don't, you're going to lose to the Niners. You're probably going to lose on the road to Kirk Cousins and the Falcons. Buffalo and the Rams. They did. And then the Niners again. That is a brutal 5-game stretch, even with 3 home games mixed in there.
Yes.
That's a really tough stretch. Or I don't know how, it could be very hard to go better than 2 and 3 in that stretch for the Seattle team. And it would not shock me if they go 1 and 4 in that stretch. Wouldn't shock me.
So taking that under at 7.5, you might be holding a good ticket.
You also get a nice plus price as well on that under too, Alex.
Yep. And then when you get to that bye week, kind of see where you're sitting.
The one other thing I will say, though, with just the caution, as always now, because we have books that have in-season win totals
Right.
up. You could wait for Seattle to get to a 4-1 start. Or we saw this with Denver a few years ago, where Denver was favored the first 2 weeks, won both of those games, and their win total skyrocketed 3 wins, despite the fact that it was games that they were supposed to win.
Right.
And they went under everything. Forget just that in-season total. They went under everything.
That is a very good point.
So even, be on the lookout. If you like Seattle under, if they beat Denver week 1 and beat New England week 2, this thing could balloon to 9.5, juiced over.
Yeah.
That would be your time to come under.
Yeah.
Come under at that. So be on the lookout for that. That's the one good thing in this new day and age of sports betting. You have that option of the in-season win total. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Parles.
And I'm Alex White. Thank you for watching this clip of Sports by the Book. Please like the video, comment, and subscribe.
We live stream the show right here every day on this channel. Also, you can catch the podcast version on your favorite podcast platform.
All the links are in the description below. We appreciate you, and we'll see you next time.